For this episode of Pollock Academy, we're going to look at John Marshall, technically the fourth Supreme Court Justice in America, but is seen as the first Chief Justice who is credited with defining the role and the scope of the Supreme Court. We'll look at his life, his influences, and we'll end with the big three court cases.
John Marshall, born in Virginia, essentially grew up at a pivotal time in colonial history, and his experiences would reflect his later actions in a newly formed America. His father, Colonel Thomas Marshall, was early on in his support for patriot causes against the British, most notably protesting the Stamp Act in 1765, which required the colonies to pay tax on various paper products from legal documents to playing cards. And 10 years later, Colonel Thomas Marshall supported Virginian Patrick Henry, who gave his rousing "Give me liberty or give me death" speech, which became the rallying cry for Virginia to support an eventual separation from Great Britain. By the time of the skirmish at Lexington and Concord in 1775, the Revolution had not only started, but 20-year-old John Marshall and his father, Thomas Marshall, joined the Continental Army. John Marshall's time in the Revolutionary War no doubt influenced him. As Edward S. Corwin wrote in his book, Marshall's experience made him an American before he had time to become a Virginian. After the Revolutionary War, and in the time of the early Republic, Marshall was part of the Virginia legislature and supported the ratification of the Constitution in 1787. He then focused on his law practice away from public office until the presidency of John Adams saw Marshall's appointment to the Supreme Court. Marshall took office in January of 1801. Now, there was a lot going on here as well. First, there was the election of 1800, only the third in American history. This election was a big deal because the election led to the passing of the 12th Amendment in 1804, where voters would elect the president and the vice president together due to a tie between Jefferson and Aaron Burr. The election of 1800 also saw the first time an incumbent was defeated by a challenger. In this case, Thomas Jefferson became the president, and a change in political power took place. Now back to John Marshall. Now 46 years old, he was appointed to be the fourth Supreme Court justice in the last days of John Adams' presidency. And looking back, this job was not super popular. All three justices before him all resigned to take other positions, such as John Jay, the first Supreme Court justice, vacating his seat to become the governor of New York. John Marshall served for 34 years, from 1801 to his death in 1835. If you're interested, head to Richmond to check out his house and his newly refurbished judge's robe in the Museum of History and Culture. If you have time, he's buried in Chaco Cemetery. John Marshall is everywhere in that city, from the courthouse to the high school and their powerhouse basketball team. See, the justices, their mascot? Pretty cool. Still, it wasn't until John Marshall took the office that we saw the size, scope, and influence this branch of government could and would have. Of all the court cases the Marshall Court took in the early 1800s, there are three that stand out: Marbury versus Madison, McCulloch versus Maryland, and Gibbons versus Ogden. These are always the ones you hear about. Take a look at this bar graph that shows the number of times each case and verdict was mentioned in the citations of the Supreme Court between 1835 and 2012. These three court cases expanded the role of the federal government, but also made federal power higher than the state power in times of conflict. Not surprising, because John Marshall was a Federalist, which means he supported a strong national government under the Constitution.
All right, so let's wrap up with the verdicts of the big three. First, Marbury versus Madison. This case established judicial review, meaning the courts can judge the constitutionality of laws. Next, McCulloch versus Maryland. That's implied powers. That means the government has other powers, even if it's not specifically stated in the Constitution. And last, in 1824, Gibbons versus Ogden stated that the United States had the right to control interstate commerce. Thanks for watching Pollock Academy.